Welcome to Hard Script.
At the table, she said it loudly enough for everyone to hear. He's always so touchy, it's embarrassing. The laughter came fast, polished, familiar. Glasses clinked. Someone repeated it like a joke worth saving. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't explain. I stayed exactly where I was, with my hands folded, like I was waiting for a meeting to start. Her friends were watching her, not me. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that she didn't look back at me even once. She was already somewhere else, leaning toward the reaction, toward the approval, toward him. I work with systems most people never see. Cooling, alarms, access controls. When something fails, it's quiet at first. A signal drops. A light changes color. Nobody notices until the place stops working. That night, I noticed. She was glowing in a way she never brought home anymore. The table knew his name. Evan. Art director. Easy smile. The kind of man people trust because everyone else already has. He sat close enough to her that it didn't need explaining. When he laughed, she leaned in. When she spoke, she aimed it at him. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her. I let the joke land and settle. I let them see me absorb it without reaction. Someone patted my shoulder like an apology that wasn't meant to be taken seriously. Dinner went on. Stories, wine, photos for social media. She tagged everyone except me. I noticed that too. Evan's hand brushed her chair when he stood. Nobody flinched. Nobody looked away. The room had already decided what was normal. When the check came, she didn't reach for it. Evan did. She let him. The laughter followed again, softer this time, like confirmation. On the drive home, she talked about an upcoming dinner, another group, another table. She spoke like I was part of the logistics. I kept my eyes on the road. When we parked, she went straight inside, phone already in her hand. I stayed in the car a moment longer than usual, just long enough to watch the building lights cycle the way they always do when a system prepares to shut something down. The shift didn't happen all at once. It came in small adjustments, the kind you only catch if you're used to watching systems instead of people. Her phone started leaving the room with her. Notifications got silenced instead of ignored. She began dressing like she was going somewhere, even when we were staying in. The first confirmation didn't come from her. It came from Mark, a contractor I'd known for years, someone who handled signage installs in the same malls I managed. We crossed paths in a service corridor, the kind of place nobody uses unless they're supposed to be there. He mentioned a creative agency pitching a rebrand for one of the retail clients. He said Evan's name casually, like it was already familiar to me. Then he paused and corrected himself, adding that Evan had been around lately, always with my wife. Always comfortable. He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. He watched my face like he was checking a gauge. I nodded and asked about the install schedule. We talked work. That's what I was good at. Keeping things running while something else failed quietly in the background. At home, she moved through the apartment like it belonged to her alone. She left early and came back with explanations that sounded rehearsed but incomplete. Her laughter arrived before she did, still warmed up from somewhere else. When I asked simple questions, she answered them while looking past me, like I was a screen she'd already swiped away. Evan's name appeared again, this time from her. She mentioned him while scrolling, framed as a story about work, about ideas, about how some people just understood branding and presence. She said his name the way people say something they've already said too many times to someone else. I didn't ask anything. I didn't confront. I adjusted. I stopped syncing my schedule to hers. I canceled a dinner she'd already promised us to friends, saying work came up. She barely noticed. When I left the room, her phone lit up. When I returned, it went dark. That evening, she stood by the window messaging someone with both hands, smiling without sound. I walked past her and felt the space where something used to be. Later, when she finally looked at me, she asked if everything was okay. Her tone was light, already prepared for reassurance. I told her I was busy. She accepted it too easily. The proof didn't arrive as a dramatic reveal. It came the way most real things do, folded into routine. A shared tablet she forgot to log out of. A synced calendar she assumed I never opened. I didn't rush it. I let the information surface on its own. Her messages weren't hidden. They didn't need to be. They lived in the open confidence of someone who believes the room belongs to her. There were threads marked as work that never mentioned work. There were photos that never showed faces but showed enough. Hotel lobbies cropped at the edges. Reflections in glass. The same jacket appearing in places it didn't belong. I didn't scroll for long. I didn't need to. Systems don't require obsession, only pattern recognition. Once you see the loop, you understand the function. The financial trail came next, almost generous in its clarity. Dinners charged to accounts, she said, were client meetings. Rides taken from addresses that weren't offices. Small expenses that added up to time spent elsewhere. Not hidden, just assumed invisible. She came home that evening talking about a pitch that went well. She moved past me to change, leaving her phone face up on the counter. A notification lit the screen with his name. No message preview. Just enough. I didn't react. I cooked. I cleaned. I kept the apartment running the way I always had. When she came back out, dressed down and relaxed, she leaned against the counter and watched me like she was trying to remember when I'd stopped asking questions. She said something about planning another dinner with friends. The same group. The same table. She spoke like attendance was assumed. I nodded without committing. That was new. She noticed the delay but filled it with a smile, already confident it would land. Later, while she slept, I packed a small bag and put it back where it belonged. Not yet. Preparation doesn't announce itself. It waits. The next day, I canceled a shared subscription. Then another. I removed myself from a group chat that had nothing to do with me anymore. No messages followed. No one reached out. When she realized I hadn't liked her latest post, she asked if I'd seen it. I said I'd been offline. She laughed and told me I should be more present. I watched her walk away, certain of her audience, unaware that the room had started to empty. I didn't announce anything. I didn't stage a moment. I let the routine loosen its grip and slipped out through the gaps she never watched. I stopped coming home at the same time. Then I stopped coming home at all. I moved my clothes in the middle of a weekday, loading the car between errands, parking far enough away that no one noticed. The apartment stayed intact. No drawers left open. No messages left behind. It looked the way it always had, just quieter. I canceled the shared cards first. Not dramatically, not all at once. Access faded instead of cutting off. A decline charge here, a delay there. Nothing that screamed panic. Just friction. I forwarded my mail and rerouted utilities tied to my name. Systems like Clarity. They don't argue when you give them instructions. She noticed my absence the way people notice background noise stopping. Not immediately. At first she filled it with her phone, with dinners, with Evan's attention. When she finally reached out, it was casual. A check-in phrased like a favor. I answered with a single line saying I was busy. She called after that. Then again. I let the phone ring while I stood in a different kitchen, one that didn't carry her voice in the walls. I watched the screen light up and go dark. The silence held. By the second day, her messages changed tone. Questions stacked without answers. She asked if something was wrong, then asked where I was, then asked why I wasn't responding the way I used to. I replied once more, evenly, saying work had me occupied. That was enough to keep her from involving anyone else. She still believed control was a matter of timing. At the end of the week, she went to dinner without me. Same group. Same table. An empty chair where I usually sat. She laughed louder than usual. She checked her phone between courses. Evan stayed close, attentive, ready to fill space. But people noticed. Not my absence, but her awareness of it. The way she looked toward the door. The way she waited an extra beat after every joke. I stayed away and watched from a distance I didn't announce. Systems fail quietly before they fail completely. I knew where this was headed. I didn't rush it. I didn't need to touch Evan directly. People like him build their lives on surfaces, and surfaces crack when pressure comes from the wrong angle. I already knew the angle. One of the malls I oversaw had been considering a redesign for months. New tenants. New traffic patterns. Agencies circled it like sharks. Evan's firm wanted the contract badly. I'd seen his deck before he ever showed it to the client, flashing on her tablet one night when she thought I wasn't looking. Bold colors. Big promises. Thin margins. All I did was speak to the right people in the language they trusted. Facilities don't care about aesthetics first. They care about load, flow, compliance. I mentioned concerns casually in a meeting that wasn't about him. Fire code interactions with proposed installations. HVAC strain from his lighting concepts. Permitting delays that could stall an opening. Nothing dramatic. Nothing personal. Just questions. Questions linger. The project didn't collapse. It stalled. That was worse. Timeline stretched. Confidence wavered. The client asked for revisions. Then second opinions. Evan stayed late at the agency. His post shifted from polished wins to vague motivation quotes. My wife liked every one of them. At home, she felt the change before she understood it. Evan's availability tightened. Dinners became shorter. He stopped being the man who always showed up and started being the man who was under pressure. She brought that pressure back with her, dropping it into conversations I wasn't part of anymore. She texted me more often. Small updates. Neutral facts. She asked if I'd be home soon. I answered the same way every time. I was busy. Her friends noticed Evan's distraction before they noticed my absence. That was the pivot. Approval depends on momentum. When momentum stalls, people look for balance elsewhere. At the next gathering, she arrived alone again. Evan joined late and left early. She watched him go, then smiled too quickly at the table. Someone asked where I was. She shrugged and said I'd been working a lot. The explanation sounded thin even to her. I stayed out of sight. I didn't take credit. I didn't need the outcome to be obvious, only inevitable. By the end of that week, Evan stopped feeling like a solution and started feeling like another variable she couldn't control. That was when she finally realized I wasn't orbiting her anymore. The shift became public without anyone naming it. That's how it always happens. People sense imbalance before they acknowledge it. She walked into the next dinner already defensive. I wasn't there to offset it. Evan wasn't there early enough to anchor her. The group filled the space with updates, inside jokes, shared memories that no longer included me. My absence had stopped being temporary and started feeling deliberate. Someone asked how I was doing. Not with concern, but curiosity. She answered too quickly, saying I was buried in work, saying it like repetition might turn it into truth. Another friend tilted her head and asked if that was why I'd left the group chat. The question wasn't sharp, just exposed. She laughed and brushed it off, said I'd never liked notifications. The table accepted it for a moment, then moved on. But the attention didn't fully release her. It hovered. When Evan finally arrived, the energy didn't lift the way it used to. He was distracted, checking his phone, apologizing for being late without explaining why. He didn't stay close to her. He spoke more to the table than to her, like he was re-establishing his own footing. That's when it happened. One of her friends, the one who used to tease me the most, looked at her and said she'd run into me near one of the malls. She said I looked calm, different, busy, but not stressed. She said it like an observation, not a report. The table went quiet for half a beat. Just enough. My wife smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She asked when. The answer didn't matter. What mattered was that I existed somewhere outside her narrative, intact and unbothered. Someone else mentioned they hadn't seen us together in a while. Not accusing, just noting. Another friend said relationships go through phases. Evan stayed silent. She reached for her phone under the table. I didn't answer. The rest of the night felt longer to her than it did to anyone else. Laughter resumed, but she was slightly out of sync with it. Her timing was off. Her confidence slipped in small ways she couldn't correct. When she left, she hugged everyone a little tighter than usual. Evan said he had an early morning and peeled away without drama. She went home alone to an apartment that no longer responded to her presence the way it used to. I stayed away, exactly where I was supposed to be. She started reaching outward when she realized there was nothing solid left inside her circle. The calls came first, spaced out, careful not to sound desperate. When those didn't shift anything, the messages followed, longer this time, threaded with memories and logistics, as if reminding me of shared history could pull me back into position. I stayed where I was, close enough to see, far enough to remain untouched. She leaned harder on her friends, but the response had changed. They listened, nodded, offered neutral reassurance, then redirected the conversation. Support without alignment. No one volunteered to take sides. No one challenged her version of events, but no one reinforced it either. The group had recalibrated around the absence. Evan faded faster than she expected. Pressure did what it always does to people built on momentum. He became less available, less present, less convincing. Their meetings shortened. His attention drifted. The confidence she'd borrowed from him didn't hold without an audience. She went looking for me instead. Not directly at first. She showed up near places she knew I passed through. A cafe close to one of the malls. A restaurant we used to frequent for convenience, not romance. She lingered longer than necessary, checking the door between sips, scanning reflections in glass. When she finally saw me, it wasn't cinematic. No confrontation. No scene. I walked past her without breaking stride. I acknowledged her presence the way you acknowledge a stranger who looks familiar. Brief. Polite. Closed. That was when isolation set in for real. She went back to the apartment and found it unchanged but unresponsive. My side of the closet was empty. My routines were gone. The systems I'd maintained no longer adjusted automatically to her habits. Lights stayed on when she forgot them. Bills came with questions attached. Silence stretched. She left messages I didn't open right away. She waited for read receipts that never came. She sat with her phone face up, then face down, then turned off completely. I stayed visible but unavailable. I answered when necessary and only with facts. No tone to grab onto. No emotion to work with. Just distance held steady. People sense when someone is no longer reachable. They stop leaning. By the end of that stretch, she wasn't fighting me anymore. She was fighting the quiet I'd left behind. And quiet doesn't argue back. She stopped trying to reach me through screens and showed up instead. Not at the apartment. Not at work. She waited near one of the service entrances she knew I used, the kind of place that isn't meant for conversations. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not fragile, just compressed, like someone who had folded herself inward to fit a space that no longer wanted her. She said my name once, carefully, like volume alone might decide the outcome. I stopped. That was all. She moved closer and started talking. Not accusing. Not apologizing. Explaining. She spoke about misunderstandings, about distance, about how things had gotten away from her. She mentioned Evan without naming him, framing it as noise that had confused the signal. Her words came out organized, practiced, ready for negotiation. I listened without stepping toward her. She asked where I'd been. I answered with the same neutrality I'd used everywhere else, saying I had work and other arrangements. She asked if I was coming home. I told her I wasn't sure. That was when her composure cracked. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just enough for the edge to show. She asked what she was supposed to tell people. She asked why I wouldn't just talk to her. She asked if I was doing this to punish her. I didn't correct her. I didn't confirm it either. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I wasn't confused. I told her I wasn't trying to prove anything. The words landed flat because there was no heat behind them. She searched my face for leverage and didn't find any. She stepped closer again, then stopped herself, like she remembered a boundary too late. She said my name a second time, softer. I told her I needed space and that I'd already taken it. There was nothing else to say. Conversations require shared stakes. I no longer had any. I walked past her and into the building. I didn't look back. I didn't speed up. I didn't slow down. Behind me, she stayed where she was, holding a situation she could no longer shape. That was the moment she understood I wasn't silent because I was thinking. I was silent because I'd already decided. The collapse didn't come with a headline. It arrived in fragments, scattered across places she used to control. She showed up to another dinner late and already unsettled. Evan wasn't there. His chair stayed empty without explanation. The group asked polite questions and accepted vague answers. Someone mentioned a work rumor about his agency losing momentum. No one looked at her when they said it. Her phone stayed on the table, face up. She checked it too often. When nothing appeared, she smiled and lifted her glass like it didn't matter. The effort showed. The friends who once laughed the loudest now spoke to her carefully. Not cold, just measured. They shared updates she wasn't part of, plans she wasn't included in yet. The energy had shifted away from her without asking permission. She left early, citing a headache that no one challenged. At work, the ground moved again. A campaign she'd championed stalled. A meeting ended without decisions. The approval she depended on thinned out, replaced by neutral professionalism. She tried to compensate with visibility, with confidence, with presence, but it landed wrong. Too sharp, too eager. Evan stopped returning messages altogether. Not abruptly, gradually. Long gaps, short replies, then silence. When she finally ran into him at an industry event, he spoke to her like a colleague he'd already processed. Friendly, distant, done. She went home to the apartment and sat on the floor instead of the couch. The place felt larger without me, less responsive. She opened drawers that stayed empty. She stood in rooms waiting for something to happen. That's when memory started doing its work. Not reflection, not insight. Interruptions. My jacket by the door she'd once complained about. Me fixing a light without being asked. Me sitting quietly at tables, absorbing jokes that weren't meant to be kind. Me paying attention when she spoke to rooms instead of people. Each moment surfaced without invitation, sharp and misplaced, colliding with the present she couldn't stabilize. She tried calling me again. The call went through. I didn't answer. She sat there longer than she planned to, holding the phone like it might change its mind. I was already elsewhere, living in a rhythm that didn't include her reactions. Her world didn't shatter. It thinned, and there was nothing left to hold it together. She found me where I'd become predictable again. Not to her, but to myself. I didn't react when she approached. I finished what I was doing, closed the panel, and wiped my hands like the task mattered more than the moment. That alone unsettled her. She stood there waiting for an opening that didn't come. She didn't start with apologies. She didn't start with explanations. She said my name and stopped, like she finally understood that words had lost their leverage. Her voice wasn't steady, but she didn't raise it. She'd learned that volume no longer moved me. She said she'd lost things. Friends. Momentum. Certainty. She said everything felt exposed now, like she'd been living on a stage that suddenly went dark. She said she didn't know how it happened. I looked at her long enough to register the change. Not damage. Awareness. It came too late to be useful, but it was real. She asked if there was still a way back. Not to the apartment. Not to the routine. To me. I didn't step closer. I didn't step away. I told her I hadn't disappeared. I told her I'd just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. She nodded like she'd been waiting for that sentence without knowing it. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry the way she used to. Not performative. Just quiet. The kind of reaction there's no audience for. I told her I wasn't angry. I told her I wasn't interested in punishment. I told her the distance wasn't a tactic. It was a correction. She asked what that meant. I told her it meant I'd already built a life that didn't bend around her approval. I told her that if she wanted to be part of it, it wouldn't look like before. No stages. No tables where respect was optional. No rooms where I had to disappear so she could shine. She listened without interrupting. That was new. I didn't promise anything. I didn't close the door either. I turned back to my work and let the silence do what it always does when it's finally understood. Whether she followed wasn't the point anymore. I walked away at the same pace I'd kept from the beginning. This time, I didn't need to look back. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.